counterintelligence.
One of the things that I'm concerned about from a corporate counterintelligence standpoint is a seeding operation where you have somebody go and apply and get hired, and then they work their way up through the organization, kind of like you did. And turned down promotions, didn't chase promotions, but it just kept coming to you. And then at each promotion, you get access to more information and you get to hear a little bit more about the organization. Did you think at any time during the course of that 3.5 years that there were other people that were being seeded into the organization that kind of made your own counterintelligence hairs on the back of your neck stand up like, hey, I know what you're doing? I mean, were you able to spot it?
Absolutely. And so were they. So I don't know what federal organization did this, but somebody stood up a brand new club in the state that we were in, and they were all vets. They said they were former soft people, and they had access to weapons from military bases that they wanted to sell. And all of these dudes approached the club that I was in, the big boys, and there was a sit down with those people, and they were so over aggressive, like, hey, we want to be friends with you, and we can also, like, you guys want, I'm making this part up, but like rocket launchers and stuff like that. And everybody left. I didn't have to say it. Everybody left, and they're like, those dudes are all feds. Everyone.
Yeah.
It was just so obvious. And also because, and I think this is the same way to, for lack of a better term, infiltrate a commercial company. You're doing the same things, right? Like, you want to get past the application phase. You have to have some backstopping to do that. You want to get in past the training phase. You want to assimilate to the group. You want to get access to the certain things inside that you want. And when you're trying to control it that much, instead of just going with the flow, that can be an indicator. It can be obvious that you're there for another reason. Like, why do you already know where you want to end up over here? Why are you trying to control the process when you're supposed to be somebody that knows nothing about it? And I think the people that are bad at doing it, they try to push it a little bit too much.
Yeah. Instead of just letting it happen naturally, coming in and already knowing that, hey, I want to work with this technology and that technology and this computer system. And for that person, you don't know that whenever you first enter into a company, typically.
No, and if you guys are probably more familiar with this than I am, but when Edward Snowden interviewed with Booz Allen in Hawaii, he was trying to say, here's the office at the NSA I want to end up in. And he said, I'd be cool with 2. But the job wasn't the same at the office. The only thing that was consistent between the 2 was the access to information. And so that's got to be a flag.
Yeah.
And especially in what I did, if the goal is to end up, I don't know, talking to a certain person that lives in, Guadalajara, and you get brought in New York City, it's socially awkward to engineer getting from there to the other place. And if somebody, like you guys are paying attention, it's fairly obvious that that's what somebody's trying to engineer.
Yeah, we typically call that like this indicator is trying to always constantly up level their placement and access to information. I mean, they're always trying to get to stuff that's outside of their need to know, and so we look for that. But it's not as obvious. It's subtle over time, and especially if the person is approaching different leaders to try to make that happen, and if they're not comparing notes, then it can get missed, I think. But I just think it's an interesting, from your perspective, it's a seeding operation. It's just what it is. And to me, I think that's one of the biggest concerns that we should have in all of industry right now from a counterintelligence perspective.
Completely agree. Because it's so much softer, right? Like, so in the world that I was in, you can't have a beer, you know, and let's say somewhere in Mexico with somebody and say like, oh, by the way, like, you know where El Chapo's at today? Like, you can't bring that up. Like, you get stabbed for asking a question like that. So, um, corporate
Yeah.
America is so much more tolerant of aggressive behavior. They're so, I don't want to say uneducated usually, but as to what an indicator of somebody trying to push them towards access is, um, just because they haven't done this, for a living. So it's so much easier when you're going into a company, which I saw like going into corporations in other countries. Um, it's just much easier because people don't want to be rude and they want to be helpful and they want to answer your question. And if that's done in a skilled way, people don't even remember that that came up in the conversation the next day.
And I think it's because we haven't been burnt hard enough yet. You know what I mean? I think if you talk about criminal organizations, I mean, they've been burned before. They carry the scars from making those mistakes. Where in corporate America, uh, I don't know that they've got those scars, and so they don't have a level of paranoia that's healthy. They're not skeptical. Maybe they've made some bad business decisions or whatever, but I mean, it didn't cost somebody get killed or going to jail or any of those things. So
Right.
I think you
There's
kind of
also not a hive mentality in corporate America or in corporate entities compared to what I'd like to attribute to China, for example. China is very good about sharing information across silos. Um, they learn from each other's wins and challenges and exercises and failures, and very quickly distribute lessons learned. In the U.S., it's it's chaos. It's federated. Everything's federated. And if we take a look at just one company, the company itself is also federated and has silos. And I think about the company I have a full time job with. They had an espionage case that they dealt with a number of years ago that made the news, so it's publicly available information. But right now, it's very difficult to find out how did that happen because it's siloed, and every company is siloed. Um, it's a cultural thing, and I'd like to think that the criminal underworld doesn't have the same kind of silos in such a sense that they can't share risk related information. I would expect it to be much more like China, where it's like, let's focus on the job to be done. If we're trying to defend against a certain adversary, whoever that might be, let's let's enforce the ethos that we're going to share information with each other that keeps us safe. That has not permeated down to corporate America yet in any kind of reasonable way.
No, which is really interesting to me because if you look at the stories, let's take the Iran and the biker gang thing again. They were using COVCOM, right? Like Iran was teaching them how to use COVCOM throughout this, and they're sharing that technique to beat us, right? And I know for sure that in that world, organizations that hate each other will sit down together, have a what they call a sit down, and say, "Look, we're getting penetrated by law enforcement. Here's what they're using, and so we can hate each other after this meeting's over, but that's the bigger enemy, right? That's the collective enemy is going to prison." So it does force this joint sharing quite a bit. And now there's almost no criminal organization that is not working for a Mexican drug trafficking organization at this point.
Mm.
And they push down, top down, you have to run your stuff tight or you will not work with us. We will not tolerate people that are not serious about being here. And they'll push out information that is classified, stolen information, or SIGINT collected information and say this is for the benefit of the umbrella.
Yeah.
But you got to play by those rules or you get kicked out of that club.
I like to think about that as being reality. It's a healthy appreciation for reality. There's no wishful thinking allowed when you are targeted by every intelligence organization in the world. You've got to be right all the time, and so reality is important. And I wonder sometimes in corporate worlds if reality isn't something that's even part of the lexicon. We talk a lot about theory and hypotheses and processes that are based on theory and hypotheses, but rarely have I seen an attempt to put the real world incidents that happen juxtaposed up against those theories and have some critical thinking about, is that really reality as it is rather than as we wish it was? The other challenge is that the average big corporation is not very nimble. They have contracts that just hold them to certain sort of technological approaches to identifying and responding to risk. And based on those contracts, they might not be able to change right away their approach to dealing with a new reality, a new threat actor that has successfully penetrated, right?
Which is what makes it easy for somebody like me to do that, right? So the two things somebody like me is looking for is a human weakness and a process weakness somewhere. And if the system isn't set up in a way to discourage somebody like me coming in, it's easy to penetrate that. It's easy to
Mm-hmm.
disenfranchise an organization like that because they're trying their dang best, but the system just won't let them. And one of the things I always like to say is from playing offense, it's so much easier than playing defense than CI because defense has to be turned on 100% of the time. I only have to be right when I'm doing what I'm doing, not 100% of the time. So, if you think of it like a surveillance team watching a brush pass, that's going to be less than a second where the operational act takes place. You got to have your eyes on the whole time. I only have to do the brush pass that quickly. And so it's an inherent flaw, in the percentages of offense versus defense. And when the systems aren't there to catch it, it becomes very, very easy.
So, understanding that there's nothing unique in the world. I mean, we're all basically using the same techniques and tactics that have been successful. You said earlier that part of your job was to approach government contractors and other countries for arms sales and information transfers or whatever that is, basically espionage. And so my guess is that there are other countries that are using the same tactic to target our government contractors and our clear contractors. And I was just wondering if you could speak to that without getting into too much trouble.
Yeah, absolutely, they are. We've even run, red cell type things against our own systems. And one of the things I think is very exploitive is that the systems are in place and you can look them up, right? You can see how companies are supposed to do business, and you're always looking for the slowest gazelle in the herd. That's what the lions do, right? And so it's the same way with laundering money in the old school way through banks. Well, let's take I don't know, a big bank. I don't want to say some bank's name and then they get upset with us. But let's say like an international bank. They've got branches, right? And so if I'm going to try to launder money through their bank, I'm going to look at the branch that's doing badly. They're not making the quarterly earnings. Now I've got, let's say, 10 of those as an option. Well, now I'm looking at the branch manager and I want the one that's got the cocaine habit or the marital problems or something like that, and thinks I'm going to lose my job next quarter if we don't show a profit. That person is much more likely to allow, like, to turn a blind eye to what I'm about to do than somebody that's doing all the right things and it's going well for. And so I think that's just a repeatable thing with any system, with any defense contractor. You're looking, and I listened to one of your other podcasts where this was brought up too. I'm looking for the person leaving the building by themselves, not the one going to the bar with all their buddies and things are going well for. I want the person that things are going badly for, that has the access or they have the means to make my end goal happen for me. And I think with modern, like, Facebook and all this stuff where people just air their dirty laundry constantly, it makes it so much easier because you don't have to elicit what somebody's problem is. They just told you all their problems online in an open source kind of way. It's not the Cold War anymore where you really have to get to know somebody before you approach them. You could spend one day looking at somebody's social media and know what their shame response is going to be for something, what their motivations are, what they're into. And so in that way, I think it's easier to do this job now than it was back then because people are putting a psych profile out online constantly.
Do you have an example of maybe a case study that you've come across over the years that kind of illustrates your point, and maybe not something that you personally participated in?
Yeah, so this was one that I was involved in overseas, and we were looking for a salesperson in the company, right, to give us something. And we really didn't want to interact with the security team. So we wanted a salesperson, man or woman that was desperate to make a sale. And so based on just doing OSINT, not even any national level collection stuff, we were able to isolate somebody that desperately needed it. It was talking about, if I don't make a sale this quarter, it's going to be bad. And they had put out this diatribe of they had just gotten out of a relationship, cheated on and dumped. And they said, I'm looking for a new person. I was just done dirty in this way by the last person. And just like spilled their guts out to anybody that reads this and wants to be with me in the future, let me know.
Awesome.
And so it became very easy to approach that person and do, like what in our world we call the monkey dance, right? Like me, you, same. And just by pretending, the same thing had just recently happened to me. And people, it's like the elevator trick, right? If you're on an elevator and somebody gets on after you and gets off on the same floor, that's suspicious. If they're on it first and they already have the floor punched, it's not suspicious. And so if you bring it up in the conversation first and that person says, no way, that just happened to me too, and then you treat them like it's a little suspicious they just mirrored you. So now I'm the one on the elevator thinking, I'm telling the other person, maybe you're a little suspect for being so just like me. And then they feel obligated to get over that trust barrier by doing all the things you want them to do.
Well, that's fantastic. And it worked out well, apparently. So
it did. And I think, like to bring the biker thing back a little bit, people ask, like, how many fights did you get in? when you were doing that? I get asked that question constantly now. I got in very few, to be
Yeah.
honest, because in our world, you're constantly recruiting everybody around you. And I had a lot of people take a big brother or a father figure angle on me, and they didn't want me to get hurt. And so they fought my fights for me very often because of that. They were protective of me. And I think on a more micro level, it's the same thing. You don't want to get engaged in doing the things that you're not there to do or that could get you hemmed up, right? And so it's much easier to get somebody else to do it for you out of they care about you.
Yeah.
That's a parallel going back to Afghanistan that we saw with the Rat Pack, which was a group of Al Qaeda affiliated individuals that you and I were up against towards the end of our first deployment together back in, this was towards the end of '08, beginning of '09. Um, the person in charge of this little cell working on two different bases in Konar province was an interpreter who had been there for I don't know, half a dozen rotations of maneuver forces that have come through.
Mhm.
So several years. And this person was go to. They knew everybody in the region. They were responsive. They were perfect. I mean, they knew who to call for any type of problem that the base had. We need to improve our, perimeter defenses because we're expecting this group of people to come attack us here.
Yeah.
That person would call in contractors and they would have reinforcements in place within 48 hours. Whatever the problem was, this lead interpreter was able to call the right people and have them come in and fix things. That's what a good spy and a good insider looks like. Their go-to people. If you think about it from the defensive perspective, a shitty insider, like somebody that's just garbage at their job, is not going to last long enough to maintain their placement and access to the very things that the adversary wants, right?
And you're constantly searching for who's the trusted person in the organization that can be my top cover, right? And
Yeah,
so
always.
if it's corporate
Always
America,
managing perceptions.
right? So if it's corporate America and the security team is trying to look for somebody like me, if the person that's me is buddies with the CEO, it makes you think twice, right? Like if I get beers with the CEO all the time and people know that, upsetting me seems like something maybe the security team is less likely to do.
Who was the target, or did it change? I mean, did you specifically go out and say, "Hey, I'm going to go become best friends with the CEO"? Did you do that on a routine basis, or was that kind of an anomaly if that ever happened?
From the corporate side, if that's on the table, lovely. But usually we were trying to get stuff and move on pretty quickly. And so you can also fake it, right? Like you can insinuate to somebody when you're talking, that you have a familiarity with somebody that's their boss. One way to do that is by just dropping the boss's like first name abbreviated, you know, all the time to somebody, right? So like my name being Matthew, if I was talking about to a salesperson and they reference the CEO's, Matthew Smith, I'd be like, oh yeah, Matt, right? That makes them think like, oh, they must have a, you don't have to say it, but they assume familiarity based on how you talk about them. Because that's like Mr. or Mrs. So and so to them, right? And so if you can actually have it, the relationship, perfect. If not, insinuate it. Just drop hints without lying, right? And make them feel if you mess with me in the way I don't want to be messed with, it could probably go negative for you. That's always got to be in the room. That pressure always has to be.
Now, did you do that as kind of a handling technique, or um, as a motivation? Like, hey, we're not, me and Matt, we're buds, so he doesn't really need to know this. Was it an added layer of security that you would throw into that? I mean, how would you use that to your advantage, other than to coerce the person to do something, or whatever?
So the main thing that I'm trying to do in that situation is get somebody to mess up at their job in their security way. That's the only goal, right? And so if it's a one-time conversation, it's just make them too afraid to be good at their job. If it's over the course of time and you're developing a relationship with somebody, I want to see them do something wrong at some point in their job, right? Break a rule that they think is a dumb rule or whatever. But now that we're on the page of, okay, all the rules at your company you don't think need to be there, and you made this small, tiny mistake. Now we're not dichotomous anymore. It's not will you or won't you break a rule. Now we're negotiating on how big the rule you're going to break is going to be. And so ideally, I would want enough time with that person to where I'm not setting them up to do it. I'm just waiting to observe them naturally doing something they shouldn't do. I mean, as small as possible, as innocuous as could be.
Yeah, but that's
And
the
then they
trigger.
steadily cross the line. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's pretty interesting. Now, would you ask them to break the rule? Like, hey, man, do you have that employee handbook? Can you email that to me? I know it's strictly confidential for the company, but really, it's just an employee handbook. Can you send that to me? Would you induce it that way?
Absolutely. So, one of the things that's huge is companies don't know how valuable the information that they think is for public display is. Right. So one of the things that I would do is go to arms bazaars or conferences for these companies overseas, and they'd have booths, right, with all their material that they're just letting people pick up. That stuff was gold to us. Sometimes we didn't know the stuff that was on that sheet. A lot of times.
Are we talking about U.S. contractors or?
Foreign, but U.S. contractors do it too. I was collecting, say like being somewhere in Central Europe where a foreign defense contractor that is adversarial to us is at, and they've just got all these documents out about the new comm system on a plane coming up. It doesn't have like all of it, but maybe more than we know. I think that a lot of times people think we know most of everything when we don't, and they don't understand that giving away the small stuff is gold sometimes. And so we could also induce this. So one of the things that we would do is set up a company, set up a website, and put a bunch of the competitors' logos to our target company and say we're already affiliated, proud to be working with whatever, all these things. And then we contact a salesperson at the target company and say, hey, we know you're in this space. We've got some clients looking for this type of stuff. We're already working with some of your competitors that have good things. Do you have anything new coming out? And they would just email the spec sheets for everything they had coming up. Just vomit, data dump, all that stuff into an email. And that would be it. We didn't have to talk to anybody in person. It was that easy because they want to make a sale.
So
And
how much does
sales,
it cost to set up an LLC?
I mean, it can cost as little as $20 to set up an LLC.
Okay. So for $20, you can set up an LLC. You can create a website for, on average, few $100 maybe. and you can just throw all these logos on and totally fabricate that you have relationships with all these companies, right? But you can just go to Wikipedia Commons and download the official logos from whatever companies you want to act like you're in business with. Throw them up on your website and say, proudly serving these clients over the last 20 years.
And if it's out there in writing, it must be real, right?
It might as well be on CNN or MSNBC or Fox, right?
Yeah. So you're right. That can be a $500 op. You get a burner phone in the right area code that is consistent with where you say the company is at, and you make a call and you send an email. That's it. It's the same. Like, let's say like SIGINT, right? Like the ways that SIGINT gear is now is a TS problem, right? But you could collect enough information from places like MIT and you could piece it together if it's all out there. The problem is when somebody puts it all in the same place, it becomes very easy to put the pieces together. And I think in business, one of the things that we would prey on is if you're a salesperson, in order to say how great the product is, you want to say as much about it as possible. There is a juxtaposition between what's good for the company and what's good for the salesperson. And somebody like me wants to be in that wedge between those counterbalancing issues.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and counterintelligence support to cleared industry. Ryan and I both had some interactions in that space while we were active duty officers. We had to help our principals think in those terms. Like, where is that intersection of the need to sell something versus the need to protect export controlled items, number one, classified items, number two, and number three, the open source items that might fill a gap in the OSINT that our adversaries are collecting. We call them essential elements of friendly information. They didn't always have to be classified, of course. They could just be all of those elements of unclassified things in one place that help them piece it together. So
Right.
there
stuff to
needs
protect.
to be more. There needs to be more of a hive mentality in the U.S. where we're sharing the level of awareness of our adversaries as to what's available in the public domain, so we can recognize what's novel, what's not yet available in the public domain, and we can protect that. I think about my interactions across industry with all of my peers, all of my counterintelligence people supporting, U.S.-based corporations that have multinational footprints. All of us are thinking about like what's available in the public domain versus what are our trade secrets versus what are we sharing in these collaborative R&D projects with foreign institutions like research institutions, foreign companies that are our JVs and partners and suppliers. Any one of those single pieces of data could complete a classified picture.
Right. Well, for a company,
and there's not a central database of the EEFI that any of us can access, right?
Right.
That's a hard problem to solve for us, and I don't know the answer to it except to say let's limit what we're putting out there.
Well,
let's time it.
I'll tell you why it's so great. It's because you put that information out there. And I think I've said this in the past, but one of my favorite elicitation techniques, especially with Americans, is to say something absolutely wrong and then let them just sit back and let them correct you. Yeah. And you can get all of that what your document says that it could do this and this, but it also must be able to do that, and just sit back and let the magic happen, because they're going to educate you on what the system can actually do. And it's an American thing. We have to do it.
That's a great point. We use that quite a bit. just even doing like a nominal cover, calling up a company and saying like, what's the specs on this? And then you talk for 2 minutes and you go back and you said, so the frequency range was up to this, and just keep going and let them interrupt you. And they're like, no, the frequency range caps out at this, when they weren't supposed to say it.
Bing.
They have to correct
You
you.
just leveled up.
It's the hand
You get a
center
new
distinction.
skin.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the things that I almost got caught on from a company was maybe one of the most innocuous things we were doing, one of the easiest ones. And so we were asked, we had a military, like, special mission unit component that works with the agency task us to get them some laptops. That was it. They were just going to be op laptops after that. And so I'm thinking, this is a layup. We're doing all this other crazy stuff. This is going to be the easiest thing we've ever done. And I put the order in just online through the company. I get a call from a salesperson that says, hey, the order's not going through. Can I put you on hold for a second? Somebody from the security department wants to talk to you.
I'll get it.
And I'm like, what? What is this? And so the person gets on, and what I was able to elicit, they thought something was wrong. I could tell that right off the bat. What I was able to elicit was, we bought, because it was a DoD requirement, things that were on sale. They were like 40% off. The security department, because we bought like 50 of these at the same time, thought we were going to buy them low and then sell them at the manufacturer's price later, and it was a scam. And so we talked through it. We got it eventually, but we took that as a trade craft going forward. You don't buy the stuff on sale; it'll flag. We didn't know, but we tripped the system for the wrong reason. And again, if the security person, would have been better at their job, they would have been able to determine that this was wrong for a different reason than they thought. But again, there's a lot of. Go ahead.
Trust your gut instinct. I mean, you knew something was not right about this thing. That's what I tell a lot of employees. It's like, you can't really put your finger on it, but it just doesn't feel. This doesn't feel right. This is not the normal way that things should go down, and trust that. Trust that intuition, and if it makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up or your stomach get a little uneasy, then hey, let somebody know about it. Let's talk through all the different potential challenges here, the different risks.
And don't let somebody talk you out of trusting that, especially when they're doing things. And I've told a lot of people this coming out. Those techniques wouldn't work against the Daves and the Ryans of the world, right? Like you would notice if that pressure is being put on you. But if you're an HR person or a BD person or a security person that didn't go through our world, you don't understand. You're being subtly moved off the point. And the point is just do your job the way you were told to do it.
Don't make exceptions because the exception seems logical given the injected scenario.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Just because the person on the other end of the phone is upset with you for not filling the order doesn't mean you got to do it. Or they threaten to say that you're not doing your job right and they're going to tell your boss, or it doesn't change the mechanisms of doing your job the way you were told to do it. Or because it sounds like you feel sorry for the person because they're having a bad day and you don't want their day to get worse by doing your job. That's not an excuse to not do the job.
I mean, that is the 101 message to people throughout a corporation that don't have training in counterintelligence, training in adversarial methodology, training in what the corporation's crown jewels might be, have no idea. And I often think about the the types of corporate functions that are compromised the most often with social engineering. It's usually the CFO organization, or it's talent acquisition, or it's something in maybe like marketing, like corporate marketing and communications. But usually it's BD, it's the CFO organization, and on down the line. Because think about their job. Let's take BD, for example. In business development, what are you supposed to be doing? You're supposed to be making connections. You're working with corporate communications to figure out, what am I authorized to put out there? Let's put it out there. Okay, so they take the authorized corporate comms messaging pieces and they blast it. They've got LinkedIn accounts, of course, and my LinkedIn, I'm fairly selective about who I let into my network, but in business development, it wouldn't make any sense to be selective. The whole point in BD or talent acquisition is to let everybody in. Where, this is the interface to the company. I'm the person who is chartered with helping you figure out your path to doing business with this company or getting a job with this company. So with that open aperture, it allows a lot of things in, of course, that, are undesirable. And so we have this sort of competing dichotomy where if you're BD or your talent acquisition, like, obviously your job is to have an open aperture, and also obviously you're a giant target. In my last, say, let's see, what is it, 2024, almost 2025. So in my last 6 years since I've been in industry, commercial or defense industry, and out of the DoD, I've seen almost completely a lack of focus on educating those individuals in TA, talent acquisition, and BD, business development, on how they can be targeted. The message isn't stop blasting your message, because obviously they have a message to blast and that's their job. They need to be that open aperture. Just like when Ryan, you and I were in the Army in the open system, our job was to be the face of Army counterintelligence that people could recognize and could call if they had a question. Later in our careers, we became these clandestine type of people that went off the radar. But early on, like, Army counterintelligence had an open aperture, just like talent acquisition in corporate America and BD, where it's like you need to be that interface where people can figure out, how do we get a job at your company? How do we do business with your company? And they accept all. I guess that's the point, is like with a LinkedIn and an account, they're accepting every single invite, every single one. They probably have an auto accept function, right? Because that's their job. But as a byproduct, all these fake accounts are getting in there and are surveilling who are their associations inside of their organizations. So social media surveillance, obviously being a real thing, it's not just companies buying advertising metadata for AI-enabled advertising targeting. It's also foreign intelligence services that are surveilling what your company is doing, the big moves they're making, the types of people they're hiring, the types of projects they're working on, the types of corporate comms releases that happen with new product releases. That kind of surveillance is something that doesn't get talked about a lot. So I think about, what is your public persona? Are you, do you understand where you fit into the broad array of corporate counterintelligence sort of considerations? Do you understand who your adversaries are and how they're using your open aperture to target your company? Do you know what to report when it seems like something's fake, something's not real, somebody's got only, 5 connections?
Well, I think if you're that person, you need to step back and say, how much of my interaction with people am I driving or being driven by? And if you're an HR person, you're a recruiter, or you're bringing somebody onto a company, most of the things should be your idea. I mean, like 95% of the things should be your idea. And if you're getting directed by the person you're bringing on, that's probably a negative either way.
Can you dig into that a little bit deeper and maybe give an example of what that looks like? Because that's an important part, and I know it's hard to navigate through, but if you could just share some insight in that point.
Sure. So, if I'm going to go penetrate a company, what I want to do is get entree in the right way. If that's a referral first that makes the recruiter respect it, so much better. I don't want to walk in off the street and say, like, hey, I'm here. I want to say the CFO said I should get this job. Now let's talk. I've basically got the job at that point, right? So I'm transferring. The biggest concept that we would use is you're transferring power, right? If you're a recruiter or an HR person, if somebody walks in off the street and they say, I really, really want a job here, you've got all the power. Penetration to that is going to try to transfer the power to them instead of you. That's the whole goal, to where it's not your decision anymore. You're trying to make me happy, not the other way around. And that can be done in a very, subtle ways of making somebody psychologically feel like they have to make you happy. When they do the things that you want, things go well. When they don't, things go negatively for them. It's how you train a dog, not a person. And if that's happening, people need to realize this person is trying to do this to me. It's a very manipulative thing to do. But I also know that person has slots to fill, right? They need to close openings as an HR person to be good at their job. So I know they're already motivated for this to work. And the better of a recruit that I am, the better they look to their boss. And so if I'm overqualified for the position that they put me into, and I'm already thinking of, what do they want? They don't want me to be a stop here for 1 year and then leave, because then they got to reopen stuff. It costs the company a lot to hire a new person. They want longevity. So I'm dropping hints of, I'm going to stay here for the next 30 years during the conversation. I'm answering the questions they're not asking that they hope to hear, because I already know what their system is.
Yeah. Well, it's very interesting you say that, because this is a different type scenario, but I've felt that same kind of feeling. And so, for example, C-staff level leader within the organization says, hey, Ryan, there's this guy that's got an insider threat or a counterintelligence program over at XYZ company. He's a good friend of mine. Would you mind helping him out and kind of, walking him through your process about how you would approach it? Well, obviously for me, I'm going to go above and beyond, because I want to make that guy happy so that he communicates back to C-staff level leader in my organization that I'm doing a good job, that I really did help them, and I really did know what I'm talking about, and and I wanted that communication to make its way back to that leader. And so I can see what you're talking about, and psychologically, it just happens naturally. This is another way that I can prove my value to the organization. And on the flip side of that, it's also a way that if I don't do a good job, it could negatively impact me and my company. And I'm just helping a friend out, but I, I've got to go above and beyond. And it's a great technique and a great tactic psychologically for somebody to be put in that position.
Well, let me ask you this. If you showed up and you think that other person is completely like fabricating it, that's not the message you want to go back and tell your boss. Like, hey, I think your friend is full of it. That's
Yeah.
not what you were hoping happened to you today. And we had a corporate case where it was an intellectual property theft lawsuit between two companies. And one of the people that worked at the second company, they'd worked at both. And they called up because they read the lawsuit online and said, hey, if I can give any insight to the CFO, let me know, right? Like a walk in. And
Yeah.
so the CFO and this person were very, very close. And so we did an interview of this person, and it was clear that they were trying to probe. Like it was a provocation. And you're fighting that off the whole time when you're talking to them. You're saying, like, no, I'm getting all these indicators that this person's being deceitful, but I do not want to go back and tell my boss that one of their best friends is trying to hurt them. So you're constantly fighting against, if I do my job right, I might anger the person that pays my paycheck. And people like me are always looking for that situation to exploit. Always. That's the, if you think your boss couldn't handle that conversation, I want to be the one having interactions with you.
Well, Ryan and I, we were recruiting assets, right? So, in the business of recruiting assets, you're trying to help them learn how to do the technical collection type of task that is at hand, right? But also be perceptive of, everybody else around and what are the norms, operate within the norms as much as possible. Now, thankfully, within the DoD, norms allow all kinds of sort of collection operations that can happen without any sort of worry about detection. I mean, I think about all of my assignments. If I wanted to print something off and walk it out of the building, it would have never been difficult in any assignment I ever had. Daniel Hale is a classic example of a person who printed stuff off at NGIA and had no worry in the world about anybody detecting what he did, and we had to recruit people and train them to do exactly that. So it created the whole memory and everything else, right? In a way that they could go leverage that same information they took out of the building in an OFCO, an offensive counterintelligence operation. So we're doing all this and trying to think about the stress that the person is under. Is the stress normal? Is it abnormal? It should be stressful, right? They're breaking some kind of policy. That policy could result in some kind of negative HR action, you know?
Right. Well, you can also establish that baseline, right, by asking for something that shouldn't be that stressful. Like, um, I'm not
Initially.
asking you to get the nuclear codes over there. Give me the recall roster. This should be something that
Initially,
somebody can do
yes.
very quickly. Yeah.
Slippery slope.
Right. Right. But I mean, once you have somebody, right? Um, if I say, like, so I don't want them to just give me what they're authorized to give me, right? From a collection perspective. And so there's no reason you can't go back to where you work and give me the phone numbers of all your colleagues. This should take a very short amount of time and should not be that stressful to get, because there shouldn't be wickets to go through to access that information. And so if they seem as stressed to do that, it's a flag. Or if they have some reason why they can't do that, right? Like if you're an HR person at a company, give me the developmental list for all the prospective clients. Who's the POC at all the places that you're going to do? This isn't the crown jewels at the company, right? This isn't like the cure for hair loss that, somebody's developing. But if it's a problem, then it's a problem.
How would you go about setting up a counterintelligence program in a corporate environment? Just some ideas off the top of your head. I mean, what would you think would be kind of your phased approach, or an approach that you would take to set that up, knowing what you know?
Well, aside from asking, all the people that are around me that are actually counterintelligence professionals, it would be my first thing I would do is ask their opinion. But I think from my own perspective, I would take a company and say, if I'm going to hurt it, what do I do? And then do two things: close most of those doors and leave the one door open that I can monitor, right? I can't look at every window and every door in the house. I can't stop every thief. But most thieves, they want the easiest way. And so leave that door open on purpose and watch that door. Or maybe leave something in that door that you want them to steal, thinking that they won. But if you close everything down at the exact same time, you just encourage the adversary to be better at their job. And one of the things that, at the agency we're very, very big on is you keep the devil you know. You don't trade it in for something you don't know. And so you don't want to stop, from my perspective, and I know I'm preaching to the choir here. You don't want to stop everything. You want to encourage your adversary to be bad at what they're doing in a way that you can keep track of, would be my approach.
Yep. So basically funneling the adversary into the kill zone, for lack of a Yep.
And if you look at the big ops that have been done, like let's say messing with a nuke, right? Changing the components out so when somebody tries to do it, it goes bad. If you got your secret sauce, you can put it over there with some stuff changed to where if your competition tries to use it, it doesn't work the same way and it embarrasses them. And, if they're stealing, let's say it's shampoo, right, that you're developing, and you change it in a way that if somebody stole it and you made a shampoo that way, it makes people like break out, and then you're winning a couple times.
Yeah.
Because of that. But just saying like, oh, nope, here's an intrusion over here, we're going to shut that door. I think it just encourages the opposition to be more sophisticated about their approach to hurt you. Keep the dumb ones coming in. Don't ask for the smart ones.
Yep.
I love having you on, Matt, because you are the opposition in some ways. You're a fake opposition. You're actually trying to help the people trying to do the right thing.
Now, I think it's teaching how to find me, right? How to look out for the old me. It's just not the way that companies are set up to look for people, right? Their wickets are set up to detect things. But if you study the system, there's always a compromise.
I agree. Well, guys, we have been going for 3 hours and 37 minutes. I think it's probably good to wrap it up for this session.
It's been a pleasure. Yeah, thanks for doing this with me, and I'd love to do it again if you're interested.
Yeah, for sure. And I don't think we talk enough about the deterrent aspect of having a corporate counterintelligence program or a corporate insider threat program. Everybody talks about how it could be negative with their culture and this and that, but And I can see that to a certain extent, but for the most part, it's having a really good defensive counterintelligence program, if run correctly, can actually have a positive impact on the organizational culture, because we're there to protect them from all of these bad people that try to put them in awkward positions and that are trained to do that, kind of like yourself. But I agree with you 100%. I mean, it's a deterrent that, hey, we're not a soft target here. We take this serious. We're going to protect our intellectual property. Go hit XYZ company. They're not that good. So, but we don't talk about it as we should.
Yeah, and I completely agree. And I think psychologically it's good for the employees, right? Because you're saying, look, we're bringing in these big hitters because what you're doing is important. It has value enough that other people want to come take it away from us. So what you're doing is that important that we're going to bring in people to protect you. And I think that can have a positive angle instead of a negative pitch to it.
Well, Matthew, Dave, it's always a pleasure, Dave. I love having a conversation with you.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you for listening to Unintelligence, the corporate counterintelligence podcast. The thoughts and opinions, along with any mistakes made during live sessions, are our own. We represent no corporate or government agencies. And if interested, we invite you to join the conversation as we seek to turn over stones and shed light on the counterintelligence mindset and its applications in the places we all work. And we're always open to feedback, so we make sure to speak to the topics you're interested in. So keep the comments and likes flowing. Until next time, stay safe and secure, and report concerns to security professionals.